I think it was about my second year of high school. Everybody else was preparing to go to university, college, that kind of stuff. And I just felt like that really wasn't my path. I needed to experience what was out there. I finished high school, and about 7 weeks later, I was on a plane to North Carolina. I started working as a promoter for a nightclub, and on my way out the door, Matthew was standing and opening the door for people who were entering and exiting. He worked as a bouncer, the security crew. He was tall and he was very muscular. I felt like he was naturally funny. He was smooth with it, and it catches you by surprise. As time went on, the more we spent time together, the more it felt like it got a little bit easier to find things in common once we got to know each other more. It felt like I had found somebody that I could see myself with long term, and I thought we clicked well. Looking back now, I feel like I was getting to know somebody who was playing a role. I was falling in love with somebody that didn't exist, pretty much. It was one of those nights that he was working at the club, and he had gotten really rough with one of the guys that was at the club having a good time. And apparently somebody at the club started videotaping this whole scenario. And Matt got his hands on this video and decided to show it to me.
Take a look at this.
It's almost like a look what I did. And I just remember looking at it like horrified. Wondering, what in the world did this guy do to deserve this attack? It bothered me because of the way that he acted when he showed it to me. It was strange. Like, why are you proud of this? And he just kind of laughed off, like, oh, you weren't there, you didn't know. Like, he thought it was funny. And I was sitting there like, huh, that's not okay. This is not normal behavior. I think he used his job as a cover so he could let out his aggression. It became a way for him to do what he really wanted to do, which was exert power and control. At the time, I saw that as like he's keeping us safe, kind of, because he's removing people that shouldn't be there. I just didn't see him using that kind of force on me, because in my head I'm like, but he loves me, so he wouldn't do that to me. I was wrong. So I parked and walked up to the house. I opened up the door and just walked straight in. And immediately I'm met with somebody I don't recognize.
Hi. Hi.
I immediately thought, oh, this must be one of the roommates. And I introduced myself to her. I shook her hand, I told my name, and she said hers. And I asked where Matthew is, and she said he's sleeping. I'm like, well, I know he's up. Why would you go to sleep right after you invite somebody over to your house? Strange. And so I was like, all right, I'll just go grab him. And he was like on his stomach, sleeping, snoring. And I knocked on the side of the door, like, hello?
Matt.
And he jumped up. I'd never seen somebody get to their feet so quick in my life. Like, he was completely surprised that I was there. He said, "Why are you here?" "What do you mean, why am I here?" And the lady that just greeted me at the door comes yelling down the hallway. He is stopping her, like restraining her from going at me. And he pushes her physically all the way back towards the living room where the front door is. I don't know what's going on. It was just a lot of screaming and yelling. Obviously, I now kind of gather like, this must be somebody that he's involved with. Apparently, she has texted me through his phone. So he never invited me over there. So all of this information is like piling on top of each other. I don't know what to do. I want to leave. I don't want to be there anymore. And she's screaming, "I'm pregnant. You're hurting me. Stop. You're hurting our baby." I don't know who this lady is, and I need him to stop hurting her. And so I take a couple of steps towards him and I punched him in the face. I don't know why I felt like I needed to do that. It just felt like it was the right thing to do in the moment. And I regretted it right away. He lets her go and she runs down the hallway. And he turns to me and he says, "Leave."
Get out! If you ever come here again, you're dead.
He says, "If I ever find you here again, I'll kill you." Matt had never looked at me like that before, with cold, evil eyes. So that was scary, and I could not get out of that house any faster. I mean, looking back, I should have probably realized what was going on. I should have seen the bigger picture. He was obviously dating multiple people. He was living a double life. After that whole mess of a situation, I just decided to end all communication with him. I deleted his number. I deleted pictures, text messages. I just didn't want anything to do with him because what I had seen scared me. And I really tried to avoid him as best as I could. So the next 2 weeks was no communication between him and I. So we met up at a deli shop for lunch, and he explained everything. He said that she was just somebody that he was casually seeing, and he didn't really want a relationship with this lady. But now she's pregnant, so he kind of have to deal with her, is how he laid it out to me. He said that he shouldn't have reacted that way. He apologized. He said that he didn't want to hide anything anymore and just be completely open and honest with everything. I was naive to the whole dating scene. I thought that once you date somebody, you date one person, but that's what I thought. Like something as cliche as like watching the TV shows and the movies and stuff, I figured, well, that's what the dating culture is like in the US. I didn't know it at the time, but it's very casual. You can date multiple people. I think I was willing to give him another chance because I had also developed feelings for this man. It was a very complicated situation. I was willing to give him another chance because I didn't want him to be out of my life. I talked about this with Matt, And he kind of jokingly said, well, we could just get married. I was like, no, that's crazy. And he said, well, then you don't have to leave. And so the more we talked about it, the more I thought, well, I guess we could. We're in a relationship. We want to be together. It started making more sense. So I eventually said, all right, fine. I was really, really young. I didn't see the consequences of being married to somebody. Looking back now, I can tell that this was not a sustainable relationship. After we got married, we started living together, and he expected me to deal with house chores. He was very adamant about me wearing more modest clothes. As time went on, I felt like he was getting like a shorter fuse. He had less patience for little things. It was really frustrating. So everything I did, I had to go through like, how would he react if I did this? Or what would he think if I wore this? Or how would he think if I said this or confronted him with this or that? It became a really like an evil circle of those thoughts going through my head, like, I better not do anything to set him off. I think I didn't want the embarrassment of having a marriage not work out. So I didn't tell my family anything because of that shamefulness. I didn't want to be a failure. I didn't want to be the one that had a failed marriage because, I chose to be married to this person. It was a shock because I didn't know how it was that possible. And so I figured maybe I missed a pill somewhere, and I was not happy about it. I remember reacting like, oh no, what now? The fact that we were in such a rocky place in our marriage, there was no room really for a child to get in the middle of everything that we were in. When I told him that I was pregnant, I called him after my appointment, and he was at work, and it was really odd the way he reacted. He just said, "Oh, I knew." Like, how did you know exactly? It was very odd. And I said, "Okay, what do we do now?" He was like, "I guess we're having a baby." And then he had to go because he had to go back to work. So I hung up the phone. And that was that conversation. When he was born, I felt kind of abandoned. I felt like I was in it alone. And I had just turned 22 at this point, so still pretty young. I was really unsure about having a child with you to begin with. And I told him, like, why can't you be the kind of parent to Eli as you are with the previous child? I need more help from you.
You look like you've got it under control.
And he said, well, I kind of wanted you to get pregnant anyways. I already knew you were pregnant when you told me. And I said, yeah, I remember you said that on the phone, and I don't really know why. How would you have known that?
Don't tell me you didn't notice.
He said, you don't know that you were off the pill for like months? He had been messing with my birth control pills. And that I was taking placebo pills instead of the actual hormone pills. and that is how I got pregnant, and that's how he knew that I was pregnant. You honestly didn't know? And he's like, again, flipping it like I'm the idiot that didn't figure it out. And I said, are you for real? Are you messing with me? And he said, no, I wanted you to have a baby. And I just felt so betrayed. I mean, the thought of him just going through my birth control pills and being so insane to think of doing that to somebody. Looking back now, it really just makes sense why he wanted me to be pregnant. It was another way for Matt to control me. He really was in control of every aspect of my life. But what I didn't know at the time is Matt is a psychopath. And it just got worse. One night we were at home, and again, we had gotten into some sort of dispute over something that he had found on my phone in one of my conversations with one of my friends in my mom group. And obviously things hadn't really gotten a whole lot better at this point. And he was really upset about the fact that I had talked to my friend about our issues in our marriage. But he was so angry, and we're in the room, and Eli's in the room with us.
I need to be allowed to have friends.
Why are you telling people that I'm abusive?
And the baby's awake, and he wants to be picked up. And Matt's not allowing me to go pick my child up because we're having this very angry conversation. And he picks my child up, and in the same breath, he comes over towards me, and he chokes me out while he's still holding my child. And I black out. And I don't know how long I'm out for. But I wake up to him breathing into my mouth, like trying to give me CPR. And my child is screaming. He's crying, he wants his mom, and I can't get to him. My neck is sore, everything hurts. And I'm so shocked at the whole situation that I don't really know what to do with myself. And he just kind of he hands me my child, and he walks out to the freezer and gets me ice and just throws it in my lap and says, "Here you go." And then walks out of the room and starts playing video games. Like, what the hell? That's insane. Who does that? And that's when I realized, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm in trouble. This is a family photo of me and Matt and baby Eli. This was taken right after we had celebrated his first birthday. I think about 2 months after the choking incident. It's weird looking back on that. I can see how fake my smile is. We were not doing good in this photo. And I really didn't want to do this photo shoot, but he insisted. I think I'm just in survival mode here. When you have a little person who's completely dependent on you, you kind of put their needs ahead of anybody else's. He came first no matter what. He knew exactly how to use our child as a pawn in order to get me to do things. Because I would do anything for that child. He was like, well, nobody's forcing you to stay. You can just leave. But you're not taking Eli with you. He's staying. You can just go, but you're not taking my son. That's what he would say to me. And I'm not leaving Eli with a psychopath. It's not happening. I mean, at this point, I'm still doing everything on my own. I don't have family around. I'm not an American citizen. Keeping everything outside of court, I thought was in my son's best interest. So I stayed. One evening, I put Eli to bed. I went to bed, and I think I wake up around 3, 4 a.m., and I'm trying to find my phone, because I remember I brought my phone in the room with me and put it under my pillow. And now it's not there anymore. And I just, you have that instant feeling of like, ugh, this knot in your stomach. And I step into the living room. And he's sitting in his office chair. And I tell him, hey, do you have my phone? And he goes, yeah, it's right here. Like, no, completely monotone. No, it wasn't angry or anything at this point. But that's the thing with him, is he will get eerie calm before he reacts quickly. You just don't see it coming. And he grabs my phone in front of me, and he goes into my phone, opens it up, and pulls up the conversation. He must have gone into my social media and opened up the message conversation with my friend's friend, and confronted me with it. And he was holding the phone and showing me. He said, what the is this? And I could tell, like, his hand is shaking. And the next thing that comes is a punch to the side of my face. It's quite hard. And I fall over in the couch, and he's punching me in the back. And all I can do is really cover my head as best as I can. I'm scared. I just want him to stop. And he stops. And he says, get your ass up. Go clean yourself up. And I'm shaking uncontrollably at this point, and I'm walking into the bathroom. And everything hurt. My face hurt. And I had broken ribs. He had broken my nose. And then to add insult to injury, he pushed me down again so that I fall into the bathtub. It was just his last little dig at me. I felt like I was just worthless to him. Like, he doesn't see me as a human being at this point. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. He kept me on house arrest for about 2 weeks, until the swelling had gone down. I remember my friends couldn't contact me for a while because he had shut my phone off. And once I finally got it back after a couple of days, he did warn me about not telling anybody. He acted like I deserved it, like I was the one that provoked the incident because of disrespecting him and his reputation, is what he told me. He did imply that if I ever did something like that again, I'm asking for much worse. And that scared me. I think at this point, I'm thinking I need to do whatever I can to protect me and my son in this situation. Now I can see the pattern of like, this is just not gonna work. It's January 6th, 2021. And I'm in the kitchen trying to prepare food for my son when I heard a loud bang at my door. And in the next second, my estranged husband is standing in front of me. Eli screams. We didn't know what was happening. And I didn't recognize him. I mean, I knew who it was, but I didn't recognize his eyes anymore. He looked like he had escaped from like an insane asylum. And then all of a sudden, he is beating me to a pulp on the ground. He is attacking me with a pocket knife and repeatedly stabbing me in my arm, my neck, in front of my son. My 3-year-old son is standing in the kitchen watching his dad stab his mom over and over and over while he's screaming for help. And you're in such a shock. You can't even feel any pain. I don't remember being in pain at all. I just thought he was beating me up. I didn't know that I was bleeding. And he goes over to my son and picks him up. And he's leaving out the door. I just remember thinking I gotta go and get my son. Like, he can't leave with my son. I just knew I needed to go after him. I needed to put myself as the target instead of Eli. I get on my feet and I could tell something is going on with my neck. Like, I feel like this, some kind of puncture wound. And I ran out the door after him, and I'm banging on the neighbor's door, and I'm screaming, somebody needs to call 911 because I'm dying. And he gets to the bottom of the stairs with my son in his arms. And he sees that I'm standing up there and I'm still alive. It probably shocked him because he probably thought that I was down for the count. And he quickly hands my son over to somebody on the first floor. And he runs back up the stairs towards me, knocks me out. And that's the last thing I remember. I remember vividly the last thought that I had before I blacked out was my son. And so that was the first thought that I had in my head when I was conscious. All I really cared about was like, is my son okay? Is he unharmed? And then they explained that my son was doing okay. He was in a trauma foster family. When they finally took the breathing tube out, there was a team of doctors that came into my room. And it was so surreal because they had to explain to me what happened to my body. because I didn't know what my body had been through. And I guess I had this secondary shock of like, I'm sorry, what? I'm stabbed? What? And everything that happened after was told by witnesses. He stabbed me over and over, all over my body again. And he picks me up like a sack of potatoes over his head and throws me over the balcony. And my head goes right into the concrete. And my son is watching all this. And he's literally watching his mom dying in front of him. And I'm apparently trying to get back on my feet. And I'm calling out for my son. I don't remember any of this. This is what my neighbors have told me afterwards. And I'm trying to find my son. And then I collapse into the flower bed. And that's where the ambulance picks me up from and start life-saving measures. I later learned from the investigators that they had caught him the same night, a couple of hours later, at his dad's residence, about an hour away. I have no memory, no recollection of anything. And the thing that bothers me probably the most is that my son, he was watching all of this happening, and he saw a lot more than I can remember. And that's really tough, because I can't take that away from him. And he was just a baby. He had just turned 3 years old, and you're not supposed to see that when you're 3. No kid is supposed to watch that happening, especially, watching your parents do something like that. It's heartbreaking. The day after, so this is probably day number 3. Oh, this is really tough. I was able to have a phone call with Eli. And he didn't recognize me on the phone. And I had to tell him, it's Mommy, I'm in the hospital. And his little voice said on the phone, you're not my mommy because my mom's dead. And that was really tough. I remember getting off the phone and asking the nurses, can you please just sedate me? Because it was too much. It was really, really hard to hear your son tell you that you're dead. And nobody teaches you. I mean, who teaches you how to deal with stuff like that, I didn't know how to handle it. It was really, really tough. This brings up a lot of feelings. Good feelings, obviously. These are happy tears. This was my first meeting with Eli right outside of the hospital the same day I was released. They released me from being able to go back home. And we had been separated for 10 very, very long days. And all I wanted to do was to pick him up, but I couldn't. And I was just really happy to see him again after all that time. I was very overwhelmed. It was a lot of overwhelming feelings and just gratefulness. Just one thing different 10 days prior, and I wouldn't have been able to have my son. And I was able to bring him home and kind of start our new normal. And I was really, 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 really happy. Yeah, this is a really good memory.
Do you believe in miracles?
I do. I do believe in miracles. It's hard not to when you go through something like that. Nobody had expected me to really make it through the night, just based on how much blood they assumed that I lost. And it was quite a lot. But it's by a miracle that I made it. I don't know why I survived. I really don't. No, there must be a purpose. I think my son had a big role, played a big part of why I made it and why I'm sitting here today. It's because of my son. I am so glad and so grateful that my son is nothing like his biological father. He loves to be happy and make other people happy. He is just the light of everybody's life. He makes the world a better place. It's been a process trying to take back control of my life, and it's going good. I'm on a good path right now. I have a lot of great people around me, my family, my friends who have become family. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. I'm living life to the fullest, and I'm taking full advantage of being given a second chance at life. So I think that's something really beautiful to take out of this situation, that I've lost a lot, but I've gained so much more. And I'm really grateful for that.
You could see the rage coming out. I've seen this look right before he explodes. I've never been able to talk about what it's like to live with my brother. People call him a monster. It's probably because it's true.
Houston, Texas, in the early 1970s, was a city defined by its blistering, suffocating heat and its relentless, sprawling expansion. It was a metropolis caught in the throes of a massive economic boom, a place where concrete highways were cutting aggressively through the coastal plains and suburban neighborhoods were multiplying almost overnight. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that pressed down on the chest and made the asphalt shimmer under the relentless Gulf Coast sun. But beneath the facade of this booming, optimistic American dream, a profound and terrifying darkness was quietly taking root. It was a darkness that did not announce itself with violence in the streets or sensational headlines in the morning papers. Instead, it slipped quietly through the front doors of working-class neighborhoods, wearing a warm smile, speaking in a polite, measured tone, and offering an open hand. It was a nightmare disguised as absolute normalcy. In the quiet, sun-baked neighborhoods of Houston Heights, children rode their bicycles until the streetlights flickered on. Doors were left unlocked. Neighbors knew one another. There was an unspoken covenant of safety, a collective belief that the predators of the world operated somewhere else, in the shadows, far away from the manicured lawns and the local businesses. Into this environment of implicit trust walked Dean Arnold Corll. Born in 1939, Corll was the very picture of mid-century American decency. He had served his country in the military, returning home with an honorable discharge, a clean-cut appearance, and a soft-spoken, respectful demeanor that immediately put adults at ease. He did not look like a monster. He looked like the man next door. Following his military service, Corll returned to Houston to help his mother run a modest, family-owned candy manufacturing business. The factory was situated in close proximity to local schools, a logistical detail that would soon become the cornerstone of a meticulously crafted, devastatingly lethal hunting ground. Corll understood instinctively that to capture prey, one must first disarm them. And what is more disarming than sugar? He became a fixture in the community, a benevolent presence who would regularly hand out free pecan pralines and other sweets to the neighborhood children. But his generosity did not stop at candy. Corll went out of his way to embed himself into the daily lives of the local youth. If a boy's bicycle chain slipped off or a tire went flat, Dean Corll was there with a wrench and a patient smile to fix it. If a group of teenagers needed a ride home from school or to the local diner to escape the punishing Texas heat, Corll's van was always available, its doors wide open. To the parents of Houston Heights, he was a godsend, a polite, reliable, and entirely harmless veteran who kept an eye on their kids. They affectionately dubbed him the Candy Man. They trusted him implicitly. They welcomed him into their homes and allowed their sons to spend hours in his company. They had absolutely no idea that the man fixing their children's bicycles and handing out free sweets was a sadistic, homosexual sexual predator with extreme, violent paraphilias. They could never have comprehended that behind his immaculate, polite exterior existed an insatiable hunger for domination, torture, and death. Dean Corll was not merely living among them. He was studying them. He was mapping the vulnerabilities of the neighborhood, identifying which boys were looking for a father figure, which ones needed money, and which ones simply craved a little attention. He was building a web of trust so strong, so impenetrable, that when the boys finally began to disappear, nobody even thought to look in his direction. The vanishing of the boys did not happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, a gradual erasing of youth from the community. The targets were highly specific. Young men, primarily between the tender, transitional ages of 13 and 17. This is a fragile demographic, a period of life marked by a restless desire for independence, a burgeoning sense of rebellion, and an inherent naivety about the true dangers of the world. One by one, these boys would simply fail to come home for dinner. A bicycle would be left abandoned leaning against a chain-link fence. An empty chair would remain at the family dining table. The sudden, deafening silence in these homes was absolute. There were no ransom notes. There were no signs of a struggle. There was just a void where a vibrant, living child had been hours earlier. When panicked mothers and fathers, their voices trembling with terror only a parent can understand, rushed to the local Houston police precincts to report their sons missing, they were met with an administrative wall of devastating apathy. The systemic failure of the Houston police during this era cannot be overstated. It was the critical blind spot that allowed the Candy Man to operate with total impunity for 3 agonizing years. The early 70s were a time of significant cultural upheaval across America. The counterculture movement, protests, and a general wave of youthful defiance had normalized the concept of the runaway. Hitchhiking across the country was a common, romanticized notion. The police, overwhelmed by the rapid expansion of the city and entrenched in bureaucratic routine, adopted a dangerously dismissive policy toward missing teenagers. Parents sitting under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the precinct were repeatedly given the same patronizing, dismissive answers. Detectives, rarely looking up from their paperwork, would tell grieving mothers that their sons were simply acting out. "He's just blowing off steam," they would say. "He probably got mad about a curfew, packed a bag, and headed to California. Give it a few days, ma'am, he'll come back when he gets hungry." The authorities categorized these cases strictly as juvenile runaways, effectively closing the book on the investigations before they even opened. They refused to see the glaring, terrifying pattern emerging right in front of them. The police failed to notice, or simply did not care to investigate, the fact that these missing boys were not isolated incidents. They were vanishing from the exact same neighborhoods. Many of them attended the same schools. They played on the same streets. And, crucially, they shared mutual acquaintances. But because the police treated each disappearance as a disconnected act of teenage rebellion, no task force was formed. No dots were connected. The Candyman was handed a blank check by the very institution sworn to protect the public. This staggering law enforcement negligence forced the families into a state of isolated purgatory. Without the resources or the authority of the police, parents were left to search the sweltering streets themselves, taping handmade flyers to telephone poles and asking questions that nobody could answer. They walked through a city that was rapidly devouring their children, completely unaware that the architect of their misery was a man they smiled and waved at every single day. But Dean Corll was intelligent enough to know that a man in his 30s constantly surrounding himself with teenage boys might eventually attract unwanted suspicion, regardless of how friendly he appeared. He needed a buffer. He needed a way to continuously supply his dark compulsions without directly exposing himself to the risk of being seen luring victims. To achieve this, Corll engineered a psychological manipulation so ruthless and insidious that it remains one of the most disturbing elements in the annals of American true crime. He realized that the most effective way to hunt a teenager was to use another teenager as the bait. He decided to turn the youth of the neighborhood into his own personal procurement network. Corll set his sights on two local boys, 15-year-old David Brooks and, later, 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley. These were not hardened criminals. They were typical neighborhood kids, susceptible to the same temptations as any teenager. Corll approached them not with violence, but with an overwhelming, intoxicating wave of generosity. To a teenager with limited means, Corll suddenly appeared as a wealthy, indulgent benefactor. He offered them access to a life they had only dreamed of. He gave them cash, bought them clothes, and let them drive his vehicles. He provided them with an endless supply of alcohol and marijuana, creating an environment of reckless, adult freedom in his home where there were no rules and no parents to scold them. He slowly, methodically groomed them, breaking down their moral boundaries through dependency and luxury. Once they were firmly hooked on the lifestyle he provided, the true nature of the transaction was revealed. The money, the cars, the drugs, they were not gifts. They were a retainer. Corll began to demand payment in flesh. He offered the boys an astronomical sum for the era, $200 in cold, hard cash for every new boy they could deliver to his door. It was a staggering descent into darkness. Brooks and Henley, blinded by greed, manipulated by an older sociopath, and compromised by their own complicity, crossed a line from which there was no return. They became active, willing accomplices in a slaughter. The betrayal was absolute. Corll did not force them to go out and kidnap strangers off the highway. The true horror of the Candyman's methodology lay in its intimacy. Brooks and Henley were tasked with hunting in their own backyards. They were sent out to look their own classmates, their neighborhood friends, and the boys they had grown up playing baseball with, right in the eye, and invite them over to Dean's house for a party. The victims agreed to go because they were invited by their peers. They trusted Brooks. They trusted Henley. When one of the boys would say, "Hey, let's go over to Dean's, he's got beer and music," the victims felt no sense of alarm. They were walking into the home of the friendly local candy maker, escorted by their own friends. The trap was perfect. It was seamless. The victims willingly walked through the front door of Corll's residence or his rented apartments, completely unaware that they were stepping into an abattoir. The facade of the Houston Heights neighborhood remained peaceful and quiet on the outside, while behind closed doors, a meticulously organized, systematically brutal enterprise of torture and murder was operating flawlessly, fueled by the unimaginable betrayal of youth, leading youth to the slaughterhouse. The transition from the sweltering, unforgiving Houston streets into the artificially cooled interior of Dean Corll's residence marked the crossing of a threshold from which there was virtually no return. For the teenage boys lured inside, the initial impression was never one of danger or foreboding. The environment was meticulously curated to project an aura of relaxed, adult indulgence, a stark contrast to the strict rules and parental expectations they sought to escape. Coral's living spaces, whether his home in Pasadena or the various apartments he rented across the city, were designed to be the ultimate teenage sanctuaries. The air was thick with the sweet, pungent aroma of marijuana and the smell of stale beer. The television was always on, music played casually in the background, and the refrigerator was perpetually stocked. It was a carefully constructed mirage of freedom. When a boy walked through that front door, often accompanied by David Brooks or Elmer Wayne Henley, faces they recognized, faces they trusted implicitly, their biological threat responses were entirely suppressed. They believed they were stepping into a private party, a secret clubhouse where they were the honored guests. This was the psychological genius of Coral's methodology. He did not need to use physical force to abduct his victims from the street, risking witnesses and commotion. He simply invited them in, weaponizing their own youthful desires and their innate trust in their peers against them. Once inside, the process of incapacitation began immediately, disguised seamlessly as hospitality. The victims, eager to prove their maturity and fit in with the older crowd, were encouraged to consume massive quantities of alcohol. Coral, playing the role of the generous host, would continuously pour drinks, urging the boys to loosen up and enjoy themselves. In many instances, the alcohol was heavily laced with sedatives or other illicit narcotics. The boys, lacking the tolerance or the experience to recognize the rapid onset of chemical incapacitation, would quickly lose their physical coordination and cognitive awareness. The lively atmosphere of the supposed party would begin to blur and distort. Laughter would dissolve into heavy, sluggish confusion. The warmth of the alcohol would give way to a terrifying, paralyzing heaviness. As their limbs grew numb and their eyelids fluttered shut, the final image they often saw was the smiling, reassuring face of the Candyman, telling them to just lie down and rest for a while. They were entirely defenseless, rendered inert not by a sudden, violent ambush, but by a slow, insidious poisoning delivered under the guise of friendship. It was during this period of vulnerability, when the victim slipped into a chemically induced unconsciousness, that the true, horrific reality of the environment was revealed. The facade of the welcoming home was instantly stripped away, replaced by the clinical, terrifying efficiency of a slaughterhouse. Coral would drag the limp, heavy bodies of the teenagers into a separate, secluded room, a space dedicated entirely to his monstrous compulsions. The centerpiece of this nightmare was a custom-built, heavy wooden torture board. This was not a makeshift apparatus, but a carefully designed, solidly constructed piece of equipment built with horrifying premeditation. Thick, heavy-duty leather straps and heavy metal handcuffs were permanently affixed to the thick plywood surface, positioned precisely to secure a human being in a spread-eagle posture. The very existence of this board spoke volumes about the depth of Coral's depravity. It was physical proof that his crimes were not crimes of sudden passion or temporary insanity, but rather the execution of deeply ingrained, meticulously planned, and frequently rehearsed sadistic fantasies. He had measured, he had built, and he had prepared this altar of suffering long before the first victim ever crossed his threshold. When the chemical haze finally began to lift, the victims would awaken not to the comforting surroundings of a typical living room, but to an environment of absolute, paralyzing terror. The transition from the warm, hazy illusion of a party to the stark, brutal reality of the torture board was a psychological shock so profound it is difficult to adequately comprehend. They would find themselves entirely stripped of their clothing, their arms and legs violently stretched and locked rigidly into place by the unforgiving leather and steel. The physical pain of the restraints biting into their skin was immediately overshadowed by the crushing, suffocating realization of their complete helplessness. They were completely immobile, entirely at the mercy of the man they had trusted just hours before. The benevolent, smiling face of the candy maker was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating predator whose eyes held no empathy, only a terrifying, predatory anticipation. The ordeal that followed was a descent into an abyss of unimaginable cruelty. Coral's objective was not simply to kill, but to utterly break the spirit and the body of his victims. He drew a perverse, intoxicating power from their absolute subjugation. The physical abuse was methodical and devastating. He utilized an array of common household tools, transforming mundane objects like utility knives and industrial pliers into instruments of agonizing torture. The infliction of pain was deliberate, designed to maximize suffering and prolong the terror for as long as physically possible. Coral was acutely attuned to the psychological deterioration of the boys strapped to the board. He actively thrived on their vocalizations of distress, their desperate pleas for mercy, and their escalating, uncontrollable panic. The more they begged, the more empowered and aroused he became. It was a dynamic of absolute power and total vulnerability, a horrific theater of cruelty enacted in the suffocating privacy of a suburban bedroom. Adding a layer of profound, almost incomprehensible darkness to this nightmare was the presence of the accomplices. David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley were not merely absent during these atrocities, they were often present in the house, sometimes in the very same room. These teenagers, who had lured the victims to their doom, now stood as silent, complicit witnesses to their destruction. They watched as the boys they had grown up with, the boys they had played sports with and sat next to in school, were subjected to unspeakable horrors. The psychological weight of this complicity on Brooks and Henley is a dark abyss of its own, but their presence must have amplified the victims' despair to an unbearable degree. To look past the man torturing you and see the face of the friend who brought you there, watching passively, completely indifferent to your suffering, is a betrayal that defies all linguistic description. It severed the victims' final connection to humanity, leaving them utterly isolated in their agony. To conceal the auditory evidence of his crimes from the outside world, Coral employed a brutally simple tactic. Knowing that the thin walls of his residences could not contain the desperate, agonizing screams of the boys fighting for their lives, he utilized volume as a weapon of concealment. He would turn his stereo system up to its maximum capacity, blasting loud, aggressive rock or pop music into the room. The heavy bass and the piercing guitars acted as an impenetrable acoustic wall, drowning out the vocalizations of extreme terror occurring just inches away from the speakers. Neighbors living in the adjacent apartments or houses might have been mildly annoyed by the excessive volume, occasionally pounding on the walls or complaining about the late-night disturbance, completely oblivious to the fact that the deafening music was functioning as a shroud, actively masking the sounds of systematic torture and murder. The music effectively silenced the victims long before they drew their final breaths. The culmination of this agonizing process was always fatal. Coral never intended for any of the boys to survive the experience. Their deaths were a predetermined necessity, the final, inevitable act in his horrific ritual. Once his sadistic appetites were temporarily satiated and the victims had endured hours, sometimes even days, of unimaginable physical and psychological torment, the Candy Man would execute them. The method of murder was typically manual strangulation using a thick nylon rope, an intimate and physically demanding method that forced him to watch the life drain directly from their eyes, or a swift, clinical execution using a small-caliber .22 pistol shot directly to the head. The violence of the act was absolute, a final assertion of his total dominion over their existence. The vibrant, complex lives of these young teenagers were extinguished in the sterile confines of a suburban room, reduced to nothing more than objects to be discarded. The aftermath of the murders was handled with the same cold, calculating efficiency that characterized the entire operation. Coral viewed the disposal of the bodies as a purely logistical challenge, a problem of physics and chemistry that required a methodical solution. The objective was permanent erasure. To achieve this, he developed a systematic process designed to accelerate decomposition and completely eliminate any olfactory evidence that might draw the attention of neighbors or authorities. The lifeless bodies of the teenagers were carefully wrapped in large, thick sheets of soft industrial plastic, creating a sealed, airtight shroud. Before sealing the plastic completely, Coral would generously pour copious amounts of highly caustic, white lime powder directly over the remains. The chemical properties of the lime served a dual purpose. It rapidly broke down the organic tissue, speeding up the natural process of decay, and it acted as a powerful deodorizer, neutralizing the overwhelming stench of death that would otherwise inevitably seep out and betray his secret. With the remains secured and chemically treated, Quarles, often enlisting the physical assistance of Henley and Brooks, would transport the bodies to a series of predetermined, secluded burial sites. These locations were chosen for their isolation and their geographical characteristics, ensuring that the shallow graves would remain undisturbed for years. The primary site was a rented, unassuming wooden boat shed situated in the southwest corner of Houston, a dusty, forgotten structure with a soft dirt floor that was easily excavated. It was a macabre, hidden cemetery located right in the middle of the sprawling city. When the floor of the boat shed reached its physical capacity, Quarles expanded his operation outward, utilizing the vast, unforgiving landscapes of the Texas Gulf Coast and the dense pine forests of the interior. He transported victims to the desolate, windswept stretches of beach at High Island, burying them deep in the shifting sands where the tidal movements would obscure any disruption to the surface. Other remains were taken deep into the heavily wooded, secluded areas surrounding Lake Sam Rayburn, a massive reservoir located hours north of the city. In these dark, remote locations, the victims were unceremoniously dropped into shallow trenches and covered with earth, their existence scrubbed from the face of the planet. Quarles returned to his quiet neighborhood, washed his hands, and began scanning the streets for his next target, a monstrous machine operating with perfect, terrifying silence. The atmospheric tension in Houston during those years was thick, not merely from the humidity of the Gulf Coast, but from a persistent, gnawing unease that settled into the collective consciousness of the community. Parents were living in a state of hypervigilance, an unarticulated dread that manifested in stricter curfews and frequent check-ins, yet the true source of this terror remained invisible. The police department, caught in a rigid, administrative trap of its own making, continued to operate under the assumption that the teenagers vanishing from the neighborhood were simply part of a generational trend of rebellion. They were viewed as runaways, young men chasing a sense of freedom or perhaps getting entangled in the burgeoning drug culture of the city, and their disappearances were deemed essentially voluntary. This institutional inertia created a vacuum of accountability, a silent, unchecked corridor through which Dean Quarles could move with predatory grace. The lack of a centralized investigation or a collaborative task force meant that every report of a missing boy was treated as an isolated, insignificant event. Families were sent away with the hollow comfort of bureaucratic paperwork and the advice to simply wait for their children to grow tired of the world and find their way back home. The tragedy, of course, was that they were never coming home, and each day that passed without a concerted search effort allowed the evidence of the crimes to be further buried, both literally and figuratively. The psychological landscape of Brooks and Henley during this period is equally difficult to grasp, existing in a state of suspended moral development where they were simultaneously the victim and the oppressor. They had allowed themselves to be seduced by the material rewards of their complicity, trapped by a man who provided them with a sense of purpose and belonging, however dark that purpose truly was. By tethering their livelihoods and their daily pleasures to Quarles' murderous whims, they had effectively surrendered their own autonomy. They were not merely watching the abyss, they were feeding it, and over time, their ability to empathize with the victims had been eroded to the point of extinction. They had become numb to the screams, desensitized to the smell of death, and conditioned to prioritize their own safety and material comfort above the lives of their peers. This descent into moral depravity was a crucial component of Quarles' control. He had ensured that his accomplices were just as compromised and morally bankrupt as he was, creating a closed loop of criminality that relied on mutual destruction. The fear of being implicated, of being exposed as the people who had lured their own friends to their deaths, was a potent motivator for their continued silence and cooperation. As the years ground on, from 1970 through the summer of 1973, the number of missing boys continued to climb, a silent tally that existed only in the private, twisted records of Dean Quarles. The city of Houston, with its rapid growth and transient population, provided a perfect cover. The demographics shifted, new families moved in, and the memories of those who had vanished began to fade, replaced by the relentless forward motion of daily life. Coral, however, was becoming increasingly erratic, his hunger for victims growing more insatiable, and his confidence in his own invisibility absolute. He began to take bigger risks, inviting boys he knew more intimately, and his temper, often volatile, began to surface more frequently in the presence of his accomplices. The delicate balance of fear and reward that he had maintained over Brooks and Henley began to show cracks, as the boys themselves started to feel the claustrophobic weight of the reality they were trapped in. The dream of freedom that Coral had sold them had long since curdled into a nightmare of complicity and servitude. The summer of 1973, a time of stifling heat and oppressive humidity, would serve as the breaking point for the entire charade. The environment at the Pasadena house had become increasingly toxic, with Coral's demands for total loyalty and his displays of sadistic rage reaching a fever pitch. On the night of August 7th, the dynamic of the house was pushed to a point of no return. Elmer Wayne Henley, in an attempt to maintain his standing with Coral while simultaneously trying to manage the deteriorating situation, brought two acquaintances to the house, 17-year-old Tim Curley and 15-year-old Rhonda Brown. This decision was a fundamental error in judgment, a miscalculation of Coral's volatile state of mind. Coral, who viewed his house as a sanctified space for his specific, perverse rituals, reacted with irrational anger. The presence of a young woman was a direct violation of his twisted sensibilities and an insult to his sense of control. The house, which had been a place of camaraderie in the distorted view of the accomplices, suddenly transformed into a site of absolute, predatory malice. The hours that followed were a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled descent into the final, defining act of the horror. As the night deepened into the early hours of August 8th, and the drugs and alcohol had taken their toll on the guests, Coral finally let the mask of the friendly benefactor drop completely. He revealed the true nature of his intentions, his voice cold and devoid of any humanity as he explained how he had lost faith in Henley's loyalty. He described with graphic detail how he planned to torture and murder the two visitors, as well as Henley himself. The terror in the room was absolute. The realization that they were not at a party, but in the lair of a monster, was a physical blow that left them breathless. Henley, suddenly faced with the prospect of becoming the next victim on the torture board, initiated a desperate, improvised negotiation for his own life. He was a teenager fighting for survival, and he tapped into a primal, self-preserving instinct to appease the man he knew better than anyone else. He promised Coral that he would be the one to do the dirty work, that he would handle the execution of Tim Curley and Rhonda Brown himself, proving his dedication and his worthiness as an accomplice. It was a cold, calculated gamble for survival, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed to work. Coral, perhaps sensing that his hold over Henley remained intact, or simply wanting to witness the ultimate betrayal of friendship as a source of perverse gratification, agreed to the terms. He relinquished his immediate physical control over Henley, handing him a knife and a small-caliber .22 caliber pistol, the instruments of death that he had so often wielded himself. The atmosphere in the house was thick with an agonizing, electric tension. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the sheer gravity of what was happening. Henley, his hands trembling and his pulse racing, stood in the dim light of the room, clutching the weapons that represented the thin line between his life and his death. The power dynamic, for the first time in 3 years, had shifted. Coral, confident in his own dominance and the psychological chains he had forged around his accomplice, stood casually, perhaps even arrogantly, not anticipating the sudden, explosive release of the pressure that had been building for so long. In that singular moment of clarity, amidst the overwhelming smell of stale air and the distant, muffled sound of the city, Henley made his decision. He did not turn the weapons on his friends. He did not proceed with the gruesome task that had been laid out for him. He saw the man who had turned his life into a nightmare, the architect of the suffering of dozens, and he realized that the only way to break the cycle was to eliminate the source. With a sudden, jarring burst of motion, he raised the pistol and took aim at Coral's chest. The Candyman, who had spent years playing with the lives of others, looked back at him with a mix of shock and disbelief, still clinging to the arrogant conviction that he was untouchable. He challenged Henley, perhaps believing that the boy's conditioning was too deep to ever truly break, but the sound of the first gunshot shattered that illusion permanently. The report of the firearm rang out through the small room, a sharp, violent end to the decades of silence that had shrouded the house in Pasadena. Henley didn't stop with the first shot. He unleashed the remaining ammunition in a desperate, frantic discharge, the sequence of 6 shots echoing like a death knell. Coral, the man who had terrorized a community and destroyed countless lives, slumped to the floor, his life leaking out onto the same surface where so many of his victims had suffered. The silence that followed was heavy, profound, and utterly transformative. The nightmare was not over, but the monster behind it was gone. Henley stood over the body, the reality of what he had done beginning to settle over him like a cold shroud. He had acted in self-defense, but he was also the man who had brought death into that house so many times before. He was no longer the puppet of the Candyman. He was a man who had murdered the person he feared most. The house, which had been a center of gravity for a darkness that consumed the neighborhood, was now simply a place where a body lay on the floor and where the echoes of the screams of the past finally had the room to be heard. He knew, in that chilling moment of stillness, that there was no way to hide what had happened. The door was open, and the truth, no matter how hideous, was finally ready to bleed out into the light of day. He reached for the telephone, his hands still shaking, and began the process of ending the silence that had protected the Candyman for so long. The call to the police would not just mark the end of a life, but the beginning of an investigation that would tear the lid off one of the darkest chapters in the history of the American justice system, revealing the scale of the horror that had been happening right under the city's nose. The aftermath of the gunshot in the Pasadena house was marked by a chilling, surreal quietude that defied the chaotic violence of the preceding minutes. Elmer Wayne Henley, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline and the weight of the handgun, made the fateful decision to contact the authorities. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene they assumed was an open-and-shut case of a domestic dispute ending in self-defense. Their initial assessment was grounded in the standard, narrow scope of a typical homicide investigation: a disgruntled teenager, a controlling older figure, and a violent confrontation. They processed the scene with the expected clinical detachment, seeing only a singular, contained event. They had no reason to suspect that the floor they were walking on, the walls they were dusting for prints, and the very air of the suburban residence held the secrets of a multi-year campaign of systematic, ritualistic extermination. For the first few hours, the investigation was confined to the boundaries of the room where Dean Coral lay dead. The officers saw a violent end to a man they might have vaguely recognized as a neighbor or a small business owner, unaware that they were standing in the heart of the most prolific slaughterhouse in American history. However, the psychological weight of the situation began to erode Henley's initial composure as the hours ticked by and the police interrogation intensified. He was a young man who had lived under the shadow of a monster for years, his moral compass obliterated, his perception of reality distorted by constant exposure to cruelty. As the detectives pressed him, asking not just about the shooting but about the context of his relationship with Coral, the pressure began to fissure his carefully maintained facade. He started to drift, his narrative becoming fragmented, his eyes darting with a residual, deep-seated terror that far exceeded what one would expect from a simple self-defense plea. The detectives, while initially focused on the homicide, began to pick up on the anomalies in his story, the way he spoke of Coral not just as an abuser, but as a predator with a hunger that could never be sated. When the investigators finally pushed him to account for why he had been in that room with those specific people, and why he had carried the weapons he did, Henley broke down. The confession did not come as a cohesive, structured admission, but as a torrential, agonizing release of years of buried horror. He began to describe things that the detectives could barely comprehend, speaking of the torture board, the lime-filled plastic shrouds, and the hidden locations where the boys who had vanished over the years were now lying in the earth. The investigators were initially paralyzed by a sense of profound disbelief. The scale of what Henley was describing, a total of 28 victims, was so gargantuan that it felt like an impossibility. It was a revelation that effectively dismantled the department's long-standing, dismissive narrative about runaway teenagers. Every instance they had brushed aside, every missing person report they had shoved into a drawer labeled juvenile delinquency, suddenly coalesced into a singular, devastating picture of failure. The gravity of the situation hit the precinct with the force of a tidal wave. They weren't just investigating a murder, they were excavating a graveyard that had been operating in plain sight. The following days became a blur of frantic, highly sensitive investigative work that would eventually rewrite the standards for missing persons cases in the United States. Henley, transformed from a primary suspect into the most critical witness in the state's history, was tasked with guiding the police to the locations of the remains. The process was physically exhausting and psychologically punishing for the officers involved. They had to navigate the city and its surrounding regions, following the coordinates provided by a teenager who had participated in the very horrors he was now disclosing. The first major breakthrough occurred at the rented boat shed in southwest Houston. When the officers began to clear the debris and excavate the dirt floor, they were greeted by the nauseating, unmistakable reality of mass decomposition. It was an industrial-scale operation of erasure, where the bodies had been layered in shallow, crude graves, each one a testament to a stolen future. The investigators worked in silence, their faces masked against the stench, as they unearthed 17 bodies, each one a grim validation of Henley's confession. The horror continued to unfold as they moved to the other sites identified by the witness. At the desolate stretch of High Island, where the sea and the sand had conspired to hide the evidence for years, they unearthed more remains. The physical toll on the detectives, many of whom were hardened veterans of the force, was immense. They were performing the task of gravediggers for victims whose names had, until that moment, been part of a cold case file that no one wanted to read. Every spade of dirt turned, every discovery of a personal item, or a scrap of clothing, or a skeletonized remain, served to further illuminate the sheer, cold-blooded efficiency of Coral's operation. The investigation was not just a search for evidence, it was a process of reclamation, an attempt to bring the victims out of the shadows and back into the light, even in death. The media quickly caught wind of the scale of the discoveries, and the news reports soon saturated the nation, transforming a quiet, suburban horror story into a global sensation. The public, who had long trusted in the safety of their homes, were confronted with the terrifying reality that a man like Coral could exist in their midst, aided by the very people they were supposed to be able to trust. The investigation was a masterclass in the necessity of interdepartmental coordination, though it was born of a catastrophic lack of it. Every jurisdiction that had failed to link the disappearances, every detective who had dismissed a mother's plea for help, was now forced to confront the direct consequences of their inaction. The forensic teams were overwhelmed as they sought to identify the remains and correlate them with the long list of missing boys from the Houston area. It was a painstaking, heartbreaking process that required identifying victims who had been buried for years, many of whom had been reduced to bones and fragments. The investigators had to rely on dental records, remnants of clothing, and, in some cases, the desperate, lingering hope of families who had never truly stopped waiting. The evidence collected from the burial sites provided a comprehensive, though gruesome, look into the methodology of the crimes. The lime-treated remains, the ropes used for strangulation, and the physical setup of the torture board, all of it documented the systematic nature of the evil that had been perpetrated. As the investigation deepened, the focus inevitably shifted toward David Brooks. If Henley had been the witness, Brooks was the secondary architect of the misery, the man who had worked alongside Coral for longer and whose complicity was just as deeply ingrained. The detectives turned their attention to locating and arresting him, knowing that his testimony would be the final piece of the puzzle to secure a conviction. When they brought him in, they found a man who was deeply entrenched in the same toxic reality that had consumed the Pasadena house. He, too, had been a teenager led into the dark, and his eventual cooperation, though not as immediate as Henley's, helped to confirm the details of the murders and the internal dynamics of the trio. The detectives spent countless hours sifting through the layers of their stories, trying to tease out the truth from the lies that had been used to justify the unconscionable. It was an exhausting, systematic breakdown of their reality, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the bare, terrible facts. Throughout this process, the investigators had to maintain a strict, professional boundary against the revulsion they felt. They were confronted with the ultimate evil, a man who had treated human lives with the same nonchalance as he treated the candy he sold, and accomplices who had allowed that evil to flourish for the sake of material comfort and belonging. The detectives had to navigate the legal complexities of proving the crimes in a court of law, knowing that the defense would try to portray the accomplices as victims of Coral's manipulation. They gathered the physical evidence, the testimony of the families, and the autopsy reports, creating a comprehensive narrative that would stand up against the inevitable challenges of a high-profile trial. It was a race against time, as the community's outrage grew, demanding justice for the 28 boys whose lives had been cut short. The investigators were the ones tasked with holding the line, ensuring that the evidence was preserved, the truth was documented, and the perpetrators, to the extent that they were still alive, would be held accountable for their actions. It was a profound, harrowing duty, one that would leave an indelible mark on every person who participated in the uncovering of the Candy Man's legacy. As the excavation of the burial sites concluded, the sheer volume of the dead provided an irrefutable testament to the failure of the system and the depth of the darkness that had been left to roam free. The legal proceedings that followed the discovery of the 28 victims were characterized by an atmosphere of profound national trauma as the citizens of Houston and the rest of the United States struggled to comprehend the scale of the atrocities committed in their midst. The trials of David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley were not merely criminal proceedings. They were a collective confrontation with a horror that defied simple legal categorization. The judicial system was tasked with the immense responsibility of weighing the culpability of two young men who had been both willing participants and, in a twisted sense, captives of the man who had orchestrated the nightmare. The prosecution was relentless, driven by the intense public demand for accountability and the agonizing testimonies of the families who had finally learned the truth about their sons. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to navigate the narrow path of psychological manipulation, arguing that Brooks and Henley had been profoundly damaged by Coral's influence, their judgment clouded, and their moral agency eroded by the man they had come to serve. The courtroom became a stage where the most intimate and gruesome details of the torture sessions were laid bare. The public galleries were crowded with spectators, and the news media provided saturation coverage, turning the trials into a focal point of the nation's preoccupation with the dark, often hidden realities of serial predation. Each day of the trial was a grueling exercise in emotional endurance. The families of the victims sat in stoic, agonizing silence as they listened to the detailed accounts of how their children had been lured, held, and ultimately destroyed. The prosecution presented the physical evidence with a chilling, clinical precision, contrasting the mundane nature of the household items used as tools of torture with the horrific descriptions provided by the forensic pathologists. The juxtaposition was jarring, forcing the jury and the public to confront the absolute banality of the evil that had been unleashed by the Candyman and his lieutenants. David Brooks, whose involvement had been extensive and spanning the longer period of the crimes, faced a rigorous challenge in the courtroom. His defense team sought to emphasize his youth and the pervasive influence of Dean Coral, hoping to garner some degree of sympathy from a jury that was already inflamed by the sheer volume of the dead. However, the evidence of his active participation, the luring of victims, the witness of the suffering, and the disposal of the remains, made it nearly impossible to paint him as anything other than a fully engaged collaborator. The prosecution successfully navigated the complexities of accomplice liability, arguing that even if Brooks had been manipulated, he had possessed the agency to walk away at any point, yet he had chosen to continue his involvement. The trial served to delineate the boundary between being a victim of circumstance and an architect of tragedy. Brooks's own testimony often faltered under the weight of cross-examination, as the sheer scale of the crimes he had witnessed and participated in forced him into defensive, contradictory accounts that failed to convince the jury of his innocence or lack of intentionality. Elmer Wayne Henley's legal journey was perhaps even more fraught with complexity, as he occupied the dual role of a perpetrator and the state's most critical witness. His lawyers leaned heavily into the self-defense narrative surrounding the night of the shooting, arguing that his eventual decision to kill Coral was an act of liberation, not just for himself, but for the community. They sought to frame his cooperation with the police as an act of contrition, a desperate attempt to rectify the horrors he had helped create. The prosecution, while acknowledging the role Henley played in ending the spree, remained firm in their conviction that his assistance did not absolve him of his previous actions. They presented evidence of his presence during the murders, his participation in the disposal of the bodies, and his role in luring victims long after he had been fully aware of what awaited them. The courtroom debate over his culpability became a reflection of a broader societal conflict. To what extent can a victim of trauma and manipulation be held responsible when they become the instrument of that same trauma toward others? As the trials progressed, the psychological evaluation of the defendants became a central focus. Expert witnesses in criminal psychiatry provided testimony that explored the devastating impact of Coral's indoctrination on the minds of the two teenagers. They described a process of systematic desensitization where Brooks and Henley had been effectively groomed into a state of moral dissociation, where the lines between right and wrong had been blurred by the promise of material gain and the fear of retaliation. Yet, the jury remained largely unmoved by these academic explanations, driven instead by the visceral reality of the evidence: the clothes of the victims, the photographs of the burial sites, and the heartbreaking, empty spaces left in the lives of 28 families. The legal standard of intent was met with relative ease, as the prosecution demonstrated that despite the manipulative environment, both men had actively participated in the hunt and the slaughter. The deliberations were intense, reflecting the gravity of the decisions the jury had been tasked to make. The verdicts, when they finally came, brought a sense of grim, albeit incomplete, finality. David Brooks was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, a decision that was met with a sense of relief by the families who had long sought justice for their children. He would go on to spend the rest of his life behind bars, a prisoner of his own past until his eventual death decades later. Elmer Wayne Henley was also convicted, receiving multiple life sentences that ensured he would never again walk free. His legal path was marked by numerous failed appeals as he tried to reconcile his cooperation with the state with the life sentences that were imposed upon him. These sentences stood as a testament to the fact that, regardless of the influence of a predator, the legal system recognized the personal responsibility of the accomplices. The trials had fulfilled their fundamental purpose. They had translated the raw, chaotic horror of the Houston mass murders into a structured, legal acknowledgement of the tragedy, assigning accountability where the evidence demanded it. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the public's focus turned toward the systemic failures that had allowed the crimes to persist for so long. The legal proceedings had inadvertently shone a harsh light on the practices of the Houston Police Department, forcing them to reckon with the culture of indifference that had ignored the plight of the missing teenagers. The trial served as a catalyst for a reevaluation of missing persons policies, prompting reforms that emphasized the need for interdepartmental communication and the abandonment of the runaway assumption. The legacy of the Candyman trials was not merely the incarceration of the accomplices, but the exposure of a societal blindness that had permitted a predator to hunt in open, suburban spaces. The courtroom had become a place where the victims were given a voice, their identities restored from the anonymity of the shallow graves. Yet, despite the resolution provided by the legal system, there remained a profound, lingering sense of emptiness. The convictions did not bring back the 28 boys whose lives had been truncated with such brutal efficiency. The courtroom drama, as intense as it was, could only ever address the mechanical aspects of justice, leaving the deeper, more profound wounds of the survivors and the families of the victims largely untouched. The process of justice had been completed, but the process of healing was destined to be a lifelong endeavor. The trial stood as a historical marker, a point in time where the state had finally acknowledged the gravity of the disaster, but for the community of Houston, the memory of the Candy Man would forever be etched into the fabric of the city's identity. The legal system had done its job, closing the files and ending the trials, yet the shadow of the events in the Pasadena house would continue to loom, a constant reminder of what can happen when society chooses not to see what is happening right in front of its eyes. The finality of the sentences offered a degree of closure, but it also cemented the reality of the tragedy into the history books, ensuring that the names of the 28 victims would be remembered as long as the story of the Candy Man continued to be told. The courtroom, once buzzing with the sounds of testimony and the weight of the evidence, eventually fell silent, leaving only the long, slow passage of time for the incarcerated accomplices and the continued, quiet endurance of the families who had suffered the most unimaginable of losses. The echoes of the Houston mass murders did not fade with the closing of the courthouse doors. Instead, they settled into the collective psyche of the American public, forever altering the way we perceive the safety of our neighborhoods and the integrity of our protective institutions. The legacy of Dean Corll and his gruesome enterprise remains a dark, indelible stain on the history of the late 20th century, a chilling reminder that predators do not always lurk in the unfamiliar shadows of the wilderness, but can thrive in the bright, comfortable sunlight of suburbia. The case forced a long-overdue reckoning with the devastating consequences of administrative apathy, as families of the missing stood as living proof that the systemic failure to investigate leads can have catastrophic, lethal results. The transition of the Houston Police Department's approach to missing persons cases from one of dismissive arrogance to one of urgent, collaborative diligence was the direct, albeit tragic, result of the lessons learned from the Candy Man's reign. The case acted as a grim catalyst, pushing society to acknowledge that every child who vanishes is a potential casualty of a larger, more systemic evil, and that the protection of the vulnerable requires a proactive, rather than reactive, engagement from the state. The long-term consequences for the individuals involved in the aftermath were equally profound and immutable. Elmer Wayne Henley, in his remaining years within the prison system, became a living relic of the terror that had once consumed the city of Houston. His continued presence behind bars, despite his role in ending the spree, served as a stark, permanent reminder of the choices he had made, the agency he had exercised, and the lives he had helped to extinguish. Every denial of his parole applications was a tacit affirmation by the judicial system that some crimes are so fundamentally destructive to the core of humanity that they preclude the possibility of true redemption, regardless of one's subsequent contribution to the cause of justice. David Brooks, until his death in 2020, remained a ghost within the walls of the correctional facility, his legacy defined entirely by the horror of the youth he had helped to destroy. Their lives became a singular, monotonous sentence, a reflection of the total loss they had facilitated, their own futures sacrificed to the dark history they had written alongside their mentor. For the families of the 28 victims, the aftermath was a quiet, lifelong journey through the desolate landscape of grief. There is no simple resolution for the loss of a child to such extreme, orchestrated violence, and the official finality of the trials provided only a superficial measure of closure. Many of these families had to navigate the harrowing reality of their children's final moments, the knowledge of which would have been an unbearable, haunting constant. They lived in the silence that the victims would never break, their lives forever bifurcated into the time before the Candy Man and the time after. The community support that initially rallied around them inevitably waned as the years passed, leaving the families to bear the weight of their sorrow in the private, domestic sphere, where the absence of a son, a brother, or a friend continued to be felt in every holiday, every family gathering, and every passing season. Their endurance and their quiet, persistent demand for remembrance were the true, enduring legacies of the case, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of absolute, unmitigated cruelty. Societally, the case of the Candy Man shattered the mid-century myth of the suburban oasis, forcing a realization that the infrastructure of community trust was fragile and easily exploited. The phenomenon of stranger danger, which had often focused on the idea of the lone, opportunistic predator, was forced to adapt to the more complex, insidious reality of the groomed accomplice and the predatory neighbor. The case catalyzed a national conversation about the necessity of vigilance, the dangers of social isolation among teenagers, and the critical importance of listening to the concerns of parents when they voiced that something was fundamentally wrong. The media's fascination with the case, while occasionally bordering on the sensational, also ensured that the name Dean Corll would never be forgotten, serving as a cautionary tale that continues to populate true crime literature and media to this day. Yet, the focus remained on the victims, a collective effort to reclaim their humanity from the reductionist labels of the investigation, ensuring they were remembered not as numbers in a shallow grave, but as individuals with potential, with dreams, and with people who loved them dearly. As we look back from the vantage point of the present, the Houston mass murders stand as a structural lesson in the necessity of accountability, both on a personal and institutional level. The failure to intervene, the failure to listen, and the failure to see were the pillars upon which Corll built his kingdom of suffering. It is a haunting, persistent narrative that demands we remain critical of our systems of justice and protective of the spaces we share with one another. The story of the Candy Man is not merely a chronicle of depravity, it is a profound, somber reflection on the dangers of complacency. It reminds us that darkness can find a foothold in the most benign of places, and that the protection of our communities requires an active, constant commitment to the truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. The victims of this tragedy have long since been laid to rest, but the obligation to honor their memory by learning from the disaster remains as vital today as it was in the summer of 1973. The case also underscores the complexities of moral responsibility, highlighting how individuals, particularly those at a formative stage of life, can be drawn into a vortex of violence by the confluence of manipulation, dependency, and the lure of a distorted reality. It is a sobering exploration of the dark side of the human condition, where the desire for belonging can be leveraged into the commission of unspeakable acts. The story of Henley and Brooks is a grim, illustrative case study in how easily the lines of morality can be erased when a person surrenders their critical judgment to a charismatic, predatory influence. It serves as a stark warning to society about the necessity of providing guidance, support, and healthy outlets for the youth, lest they become prey to, or pawns of, the predators who are constantly looking for a way into their lives. The tragedy in Houston was not an isolated aberration, but a warning of what can happen when a city stops caring for its most vulnerable members. Ultimately, the Candyman case remains a significant, if traumatic, turning point in the evolution of criminal investigation and public consciousness. It forced the hand of a stagnant justice system, shattered the naive comforts of suburban peace, and left behind a legacy of mourning that transformed the families of the victims into a collective of enduring strength. While the bodies were long ago reclaimed from the boat shed and the beach, the intellectual and emotional excavation continues as we try to understand how such a prolonged and devastating loss could have been allowed to unfold. The history of the 28 boys is the history of a profound, systemic collapse, one that requires constant reflection to ensure that it never repeats. Their names, their stories, and the agonizing circumstances of their deaths serve as a permanent, immovable barrier against the return of such apathy. The silence that once protected Dean Corll has been broken, and in its place is a steady, uncompromising demand for vigilance. We remember the victims not only for the lives they were denied, but for the profound, collective commitment to justice and awareness that their memory has inspired in the generations that have followed. Their final legacy is one of enlightenment, a hard-won realization that the safety of our society is a shared responsibility that begins with the ability to see, to act, and to protect. The horror of the Pasadena house remains, but the light that has been shone upon it has ensured that no such shadow can ever again operate in the dark, and that the story of the Candy Man serves forever as a guardian of the truth. The finality of the tragedy surrounding the Houston mass murders is not found in the closure of the legal files or the passing of the perpetrators, but in the persistent, quiet endurance of the stories that have been etched into the consciousness of the nation. For decades, the narrative of Dean Corll has served as a harrowing case study for criminologists, sociologists, and psychologists, all of whom have sought to dissect the mechanics of how a single individual could effectively camouflage such a vast, predatory apparatus within the fabric of a functioning suburban community. The lessons extracted from the case are multifaceted, touching upon the critical importance of early intervention in cases of adolescent delinquency, the necessity of rigorous forensic standards in missing persons investigations, and the profound, long-term impacts of extreme trauma on both the survivors and the families of the deceased. Yet, beyond these academic and systemic observations lies the core of the story, which is the irrecoverable loss of 28 young men, each of whom represented a unique, unwritten future that was extinguished with cold, deliberate calculation. The weight of their absence continues to be a tangible presence in the city of Houston, a reminder of the fragility of the peace we often take for granted and the hidden, terrible currents that can flow beneath the surface of the everyday world. In reflecting upon the broader implications of the case, it becomes clear that the Candyman's ability to operate for so long was as much a product of social dynamics as it was a result of his own sadistic ingenuity. By exploiting the specific social vulnerabilities of teenagers, their need for validation, their desire for independence, and their susceptibility to material lures, Coral created a structure that relied on the silence and complicity of his victims' peers to maintain its integrity. This dynamic forces a deeper, more uncomfortable examination of how we, as a society, foster and support the development of our youth. It highlights the dangers of alienation and the importance of fostering environments where young people feel empowered to speak out when they encounter something that seems fundamentally wrong, regardless of the perceived social cost. The tragedy of Brooks and Henley is not just a story of criminal culpability. It is a profound illustration of how the breakdown of moral guidance and the normalization of predatory influence can lead to a state of total, destructive moral erosion. Their transformation from vulnerable teenagers into active participants in mass murder remains one of the most sobering aspects of the case, serving as a permanent warning about the consequences of allowing such influences to take root in the lives of the young. As the years continue to accumulate since that fateful summer in 1973, the cultural imprint of the Houston mass murders has evolved, moving from the immediate shock of the discovery to a more nuanced, reflective historical memory. True crime literature and media have meticulously reconstructed the timeline of the crimes, ensuring that the details are preserved for future generations. Yet this documentation often risks romanticizing the events or focusing too intently on the monster at the center of the storm. The true challenge, which has been embraced by many who study the case today, is to recenter the discourse on the humanity of the victims and the enduring, quiet suffering of those who were left behind. This shift in perspective is vital, as it prevents the case from becoming a mere artifact of horror, transforming it instead into a site of remembrance and a call to action for improved protective measures. The memory of the victims is honored every time a missing person is reported with seriousness, every time an investigation is conducted with thoroughness, and every time the warning signs of predatory behavior are identified and addressed before they can escalate into a catastrophe. The institutional transformation that was forced by the discovery of the burial sites at the Boat Shed and High Island has been significant, representing a permanent change in how law enforcement agencies approach the phenomenon of missing children. The move toward a more centralized, data-driven, and collaborative model for identifying patterns in disappearances is a direct, hard-won legacy of the systemic failure that allowed Coral to remain undetected for so long. The realization that a singular, consistent pattern of disappearance could span several years and involve multiple, connected perpetrators was a paradigm shift that has saved countless lives in the decades since. The Houston case, in all its devastating magnitude, provided the hard evidence required to reform the policies that had previously prioritized administrative convenience over the safety of the individual. This legacy, while forged in the crucible of extreme tragedy, stands as one of the few positive outcomes of the ordeal, ensuring that the investigative landscape of the modern era is better equipped to prevent such a prolonged and devastating loss of life. The psychological landscape of the survivors, the parents, the siblings, and the friends of the 28 victims, remains a space of deep, quiet complexity that the passing of time can only partially heal. They have spent the better part of a century living with the aftermath, their resilience a testament to the strength of the human spirit when confronted with the most horrific of realities. Their experiences serve as a stark reminder that justice, in its legal sense, is only the beginning of a long, often solitary path toward restoration. The existence of the Candy Man has left a mark on the identity of the families, a shared, painful history that unites them in a common, solemn remembrance. Their voices, though often quiet, have been the most persistent and authentic record of the tragedy, emphasizing the importance of human dignity in the face of dehumanizing violence. By refusing to let the stories of their loved ones be reduced to the clinical notes of an autopsy, they have preserved the integrity of the individuals behind the statistics, ensuring that their names are spoken with the respect and gravity they are due. In the final analysis, the story of the Houston mass murders serves as a perpetual, somber mirror to our own sense of security and our understanding of the dangers that reside within our communities. It challenges us to look beyond the surface of what is presented, to question the nature of the trust we extend to others, and to recognize the inherent responsibilities we hold toward the youth among us. The case is a reminder that evil is not a distant, abstract concept but a tangible reality that can occupy the very spaces we consider safe and familiar. The endurance of this story, its ability to haunt and to instruct, ensures that it remains an essential component of our collective understanding of crime, justice, and the fragility of our social contracts. While the individual lives of the 28 victims were stolen, their collective memory continues to serve as a guardian, a silent witness that demands we remain vigilant, compassionate, and committed to the protection of every life, ensuring that the dark lessons learned from the summer of 1973 are never forgotten. As we move further into the future, the narrative of the Candy Man will continue to function as a vital, if painful, reference point, reminding us of the profound cost of apathy and the enduring, essential value of the truth. The story does not end with the death of the predator or the incarceration of his accomplices. It continues in our commitment to preventing the return of such darkness, in our dedication to the memory of the fallen, and in our unwavering resolve to safeguard the future from the recurrence of such an unmitigated, historical catastrophe. The legacy of the 28 is one of profound, lasting impact, a call for a society that is not only aware of the darkness, but is also deeply, fundamentally invested in the triumph of the light. As the curtain draws on the harrowing chronicle of the Houston mass murders, we are left to contemplate the profound and chilling silence that follows such an immense, concentrated eruption of human depravity. The legacy of Dean Corll is not merely that of a serial killer, but that of a systematic destroyer of youth, a man who exploited the fundamental trust and naivety of the adolescent experience to fuel a dark, ritualistic obsession that consumed the lives of 28 young men. To truly grasp the gravity of this nightmare, one must look past the gruesome mechanics of the torture board and the shallow graves, and instead focus on the shattered futures, the broken families, and the irreversible loss of potential that ripples outward from the Pasadena house. The Candy Man was not just a predator. He was a symptom of a societal blind spot, a failure of vigilance that allowed a man of his nature to construct an entire, murderous enterprise under the very nose of an unsuspecting community. This case demands that we engage in a perpetual, critical examination of how we define safety, how we perceive the dangers within our own neighborhoods, and how we respond to the vulnerability of the young people who represent the future of our society. The narrative of this tragedy serves as a constant, somber reminder that the veneer of civilization is thinner than we often like to believe. The suburban architecture of Houston in the 1970s provided the perfect camouflage for Corll, a man who expertly navigated the roles of helpful veteran and generous benefactor, successfully masking the monster within behind a facade of mid-century decency. This aspect of the crime is perhaps the most disturbing, as it forces us to confront the possibility that the people we encounter, trust, and even welcome into our lives may be hiding depths of malice that defy our understanding. It is a lesson in the necessity of healthy skepticism and the importance of active engagement in the lives of our teenagers, ensuring that they are equipped with the knowledge and the support systems to navigate the complexities of the world around them. The Candyman's ability to recruit David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley into his orbit of death is a masterclass in the destructive power of influence, demonstrating how easily the moral framework of a young person can be compromised when they are offered a distorted sense of belonging, material comfort, and a perceived path to independence. Looking back, the systemic failures of the Houston law enforcement community during the period of the disappearances remain a critical point of analysis for those seeking to prevent such a catastrophe from ever occurring again. The dismissal of missing teenagers as mere runaways was a fatal administrative error, a callous bureaucratic routine that effectively shielded Coral from detection for years. This institutional indifference was not merely an oversight, it was a profound, ethical dereliction of duty that directly facilitated the continuation of the massacre. The eventual shift toward a more nuanced, proactive approach to missing persons cases represents the hard-won wisdom of a city that had been forced to look into the abyss of its own negligence. The legacy of the 28 victims is thus tied to the structural reforms of modern policing, where the value of a single human life is prioritized over the ease of case closure, and where the interconnectedness of seemingly isolated events is sought out with meticulous, unwavering rigor. The evolution of these policies is the true, lasting monument to the boys who were lost, ensuring that their names and their tragic ends serve as a bulwark against the return of such profound institutional failure. The lives of David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, inextricably linked to the narrative of the Candyman, offer a dark, cautionary exploration of the long-term consequences of participating in such an absolute, moral catastrophe. Their existence within the prison system for decades served as a stark, living conclusion to the narrative that began in the Pasadena house, a permanent embodiment of the consequences of allowing one's agency to be consumed by the shadow of a predator. Their stories are a testament to the fact that while the influence of a monster like Coral is immense, the choices made by the individuals who enable him are their own, and the weight of those choices is a burden that cannot be cast off. The judicial process, by imposing life sentences, affirmed the necessity of personal accountability, reinforcing the principle that being a victim of manipulation does not grant an exemption from the moral and legal responsibility for the taking of a human life. Their presence in the historical record of the case continues to complicate our understanding of the tragedy, forcing us to grapple with the blurred lines between perpetrator and accomplice in a dynamic of systemic, enforced trauma. In the final reckoning, we are reminded that the Houston mass murders are more than a historical anomaly. They are a vital, painful reference point for the ongoing struggle to protect the integrity of our society. The memory of the 28 victims compels us to maintain a constant, vigilant awareness, to listen to the whispers of concern before they become the screams of a tragedy, and to foster environments where the safety and development of our youth are the foremost priorities. The silence that once protected Dean Coral has been replaced by a chorus of remembrance, a persistent and uncompromising demand for justice, truth, and the unwavering defense of human life. The story of the Candyman is not a finish line, but a warning, an essential and enduring part of our collective education in the costs of indifference. It remains a powerful catalyst for change, ensuring that the lessons of the past continue to guide our present and our future, keeping the memory of the fallen as a safeguard against the darkness that would otherwise seek to return. As the memory of the Pasadena house fades into the annals of history, the resolve to uphold the value of every life remains our most powerful defense. The tragedy of the 28 young men lost to the Candyman is a wound that never truly closes, a loss that defies the simple passage of time. Yet, in the shared commitment to remember them, not just as victims, but as individuals whose lives held the promise of the future, we find a measure of redemption. The case stands as a permanent, immovable landmark in the history of crime, a somber reflection on the dangers that exist in the most quiet and familiar of places. It serves as an essential, if harrowing, element of our understanding of the complexities of the human condition and the enduring, vital necessity of moral courage. The journey toward understanding, toward healing, and toward a more vigilant society is a continuous, collective effort that draws its strength from the memory of those who were stolen away. Their names are a testament to the endurance of the truth, a beacon that ensures the shadows of the past can never again fully obscure the light of our commitment to one another. The saga of the Houston mass murders is now ours to carry, a responsibility that demands we hold the memories of the 28 close, using them as a shield to protect the lives that remain. Ultimately, we are left to honor the victims not by dwelling on the brutality of their end, but by living in a way that safeguards the futures they were so cruelly denied. The Candyman may have taken their lives, but he could not take their place in the history of our consciousness, nor could he erode the lasting impact they have had on the way we protect and cherish one another. The legacy of the Houston mass murders is a testament to the resilience of the families who endured, the determination of the investigators who sought the truth, and the ongoing, societal commitment to the vigilance required to prevent such a loss from occurring ever again. The story is now etched into the bedrock of our understanding, a silent, powerful, and essential record of a tragedy that must never be permitted to fade from view. We bear this history forward with a somber, deepened respect for the sanctity of every life, ensuring that the story of the Candyman, in all its devastating finality, remains a guardian of the truth, a beacon of caution, and an enduring tribute to the 28 souls who were, and forever will be, a vital part of the history we are committed to never forgetting. Through our shared awareness, our continued vigilance, and our unwavering commitment to the safety of our communities, we ensure that the light of the future remains bright, and that the darkness of the past is never permitted to reclaim the ground that has been so hard-won in the name of truth and the defense of all humanity. The final chapter of this profound and devastating narrative does not reside in the archives of a courthouse or the cold stones of a memorial, but rather in the persistent, evolving vigilance of the society that was forced to confront its own reflection in the mirror of the Houston mass murders. As the decades drift further from that sweltering summer of 1973, the story of Dean Corll has transcended the boundaries of a singular criminal investigation to become a foundational element of our modern understanding of collective responsibility. It is a narrative that challenges the very architecture of our comfort, urging us to recognize that the most dangerous threats are often those that exist in plain sight, camouflaged by the very norms of trust and community expectation that we hold most dear. The realization that the Candyman's reign of terror was permitted to flourish for so long due to a widespread, institutional refusal to look at the darker realities of our suburban lives remains a foundational lesson for every generation that seeks to maintain the security of its community. This is not a lesson that can be learned once and then forgotten. It is an active, ongoing process of remaining awake to the possibilities of harm, questioning the status quo, and refusing to accept the convenient, dismissive explanations that so often mask the truth of a developing tragedy. The enduring impact of the case is perhaps most clearly seen in the permanent shift toward a more compassionate and rigorous approach to the missing, particularly among the youth. The tragedy of the 28 victims forced a transformation in the priorities of justice, compelling institutions to move away from the dangerous, exclusionary categories of the past and toward a model of investigation that treats each disappearance as a significant, potentially lethal event requiring immediate and concentrated attention. This transformation is not merely procedural, it is the manifestation of a moral evolution, a public acknowledgement that the failure to protect the young is a failure to protect the future of the entire society. The memory of the boys who were taken serves as a constant, silent benchmark for the efficacy of our protective systems, a reminder of the catastrophic cost when those systems falter. Every time a community rallies to search for a missing person, every time a law enforcement agency demonstrates a commitment to transparency and thoroughness, and every time a parent feels empowered to demand answers in the face of bureaucratic indifference, the memory of the victims is honored, and the lessons of the past are actively applied to the present. The psychological legacy of the Houston mass murders also continues to inform our understanding of the complexities of the human condition, particularly regarding the mechanisms of indoctrination and the erosion of individual moral agency under the influence of extreme predatory control. The stories of David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley remain critical components of this exploration, as they force us to confront the vulnerability of the adolescent mind when exposed to a systematically curated and manipulative environment. By analyzing the trajectory of their complicity, we gain a deeper insight into the subtle, incremental ways in which the barriers of morality can be dismantled, and the crucial importance of providing young people with the social, emotional, and intellectual support necessary to resist such catastrophic influences. This analysis is not intended to excuse their actions, but to understand the environmental and psychological catalysts that allowed a man like Coral to transform peers into participants. It is a vital area of study that informs our efforts to create more resilient, more informed, and more supportive communities for the youth of today, ensuring they are not only protected from predators, but also fortified against the insidious lure of extremist or destructive belief systems. Moreover, the persistent relevance of this tragedy in the cultural landscape reminds us of the power of narrative in maintaining the visibility of those who have been marginalized or forgotten. The 28 victims were, for a time, treated as invisible by the very structures meant to ensure their safety. It was the eventual, agonizing recovery of their stories that forced a reckoning with their humanity. This serves as a potent reminder that the act of remembrance is an act of justice, a persistent refusal to let the narrative of a victim be defined by the violence of their end. By keeping the stories of the victims alive, by speaking their names, and by ensuring that the history of their loss is accurately and respectfully maintained, we perform a vital service to the integrity of our society. It is an act that resists the dehumanizing intent of the predator, reestablishing the victim as an individual with a history, a family, and a potential, rather than merely an object in a cold case file. This commitment to remembrance is a fundamental pillar of our resilience, a way of ensuring that the horror of the past does not simply fade into apathy, but instead transforms into a beacon that guides our protective efforts for the future. As we continue to navigate the complexities of the modern world, the story of the Candyman remains an essential reference point, an anchor for our collective moral consciousness. It is a story that requires us to maintain a balance between the necessary trust that allows our communities to function and the critical vigilance that ensures that trust is not exploited. It is a call to be more present in the lives of those around us, to be more responsive to the subtle indicators of distress or isolation, and to be more courageous in confronting the discomfort of the truth. The legacy of the Houston mass murders is not static. It is a dynamic, living lesson that demands we remain students of history, even when that history is deeply painful. By choosing to face the reality of the 28 losses, by acknowledging the systemic failures that enabled them, and by committing ourselves to a more proactive and empathetic model of social engagement, we create a society that is fundamentally more resistant to the shadows that once claimed so many promising lives. The weight of this history is a shared responsibility, a burden that is lightened only through our collective commitment to the values of vigilance, compassion, and justice. The 28 young men who were lost are not merely subjects of a horrific past. They are the motivation for a safer and more aware future. Their names are permanently woven into the tapestry of our understanding of what it means to be a protective and responsible society, and their tragedy serves as an immovable barrier to the return of such profound and institutionalized indifference. In our commitment to safeguarding the futures of all young people, we find the truest form of tribute to the memories of those who were so cruelly taken. We hold their stories with a deep and somber respect, using them as a source of strength in our ongoing effort to build a world where such a nightmare could never find a place to take root. The path ahead is illuminated by the hard-won insights of the past, and we walk it with a deepened understanding of our duty to one another, ensuring that the light of our awareness remains clear and focused, forever casting back the shadows that once threatened to consume the heart of the community. The legacy of the 28 is thus secured, not by the passage of time alone, but by our dedication to the principles of humanity, awareness, and the unwavering pursuit of a future that is defined by the security and dignity of every individual, regardless of their background or the challenges they may face. The story of the Houston mass murders, in its devastating and undeniable reality, stands as the ultimate testament to the importance of our common humanity, a record that will forever serve as a guardian of the truth, an inspiration for our vigilance, and an enduring, somber tribute to the 28 souls who continue to remind us of the precious, fragile nature of the lives we are sworn to protect. In the end, The history of the Candyman is not about the triumph of darkness, but about the resilience of the light that persisted, the light of remembrance, the light of justice, and the light of a society that, however belatedly, refused to remain blind to the suffering of its most vulnerable members, a resolve that must endure through every generation as a testament to the fact that we have learned, we have grown, and we will remain, above all else, keepers of the memory and guardians of the truth, ensuring that the shadows of the past can never again find a sanctuary in the life we share together. The final reflection on the Houston mass murders leads us to a place of profound stillness, where the echoes of the past meet the urgent responsibilities of the present. To close this chronicle is not to bid farewell to the victims, but to solidify their place in the moral architecture of our society. The legacy of the 28 boys is a permanent fixture in the history of the American experience, representing the catastrophic intersection of unchecked predatory intent and a systemic blindness that allowed such an evil to operate with impunity. As we contemplate the totality of their loss, we must recognize that the responsibility to honor them extends far beyond the boundaries of this narrative. It requires an active, ongoing dedication to the principles of vigilance, empathy, and institutional accountability. The story of the Candyman serves as a harsh but necessary light, illuminating the critical importance of fostering communities where every individual is seen, where every concern is heard, and where the safety of the vulnerable is treated as the foundational measure of our collective integrity. The trauma inflicted by Dean Corll was absolute, but the resolution of a society to learn from that trauma is the ultimate assertion of our resilience. When we consider the devastating efficiency of the Pasadena house, we are forced to grapple with the reality that the most profound threats to our security are often those that reside in the gaps of our own awareness. The lesson is clear. Complacency is the most effective ally of the predator. By allowing the routine of our lives to distance us from the realities of those who may be struggling, isolated, or in need, we inadvertently create the environment in which the dark and the malicious can flourish. The Houston tragedy is a call to break the silence that often surrounds the suffering of the young, to look past the superficial presentations of normalcy, and to engage with the lives of others with a depth and sincerity that leaves no room for the shadows to hide. This is a commitment to a standard of social responsibility that rejects the apathy of the past and embraces a future defined by a rigorous, compassionate dedication to the well-being of all members of the community, especially those who are most at risk of being overlooked. The memories of the 28 victims act as a perpetual, silent mandate for change and improvement in the systems that define our societal structure. Their presence is felt in every policy reform that prioritizes the welfare of the missing, in every investigative procedure that demands collaboration and thoroughness, and in every cultural conversation that seeks to understand the root causes of violence and exploitation. Their legacy is one of transformative awareness, ensuring that the horror of their experience is translated into a protective force that safeguards the generations to come. We must carry their stories not as a burden of despair, but as a map of the dangers we have identified and the progress we have achieved. It is a map that reminds us of how far we have come, yet it also warns us of how much remains to be done to ensure that no such tragedy is ever permitted to repeat. The resilience of the families who have lived with the aftermath for these many decades is a testament to the fact that while the loss is irrecoverable, the spirit of remembrance is an unstoppable force of light that persists through the longest of shadows. As we move forward, the narrative of this case should serve as an essential and permanent component of our education in what it means to be a responsible, protective society. It is a narrative that challenges the pride of our institutions and the comfort of our neighborhoods, forcing us to engage with the uncomfortable truths about the world we live in and the potential for darkness that exists within it. By integrating these lessons into the fabric of our collective memory, we ensure that the lessons of 1973 remain a living, breathing component of our vigilance. This is the ultimate act of honor we can bestow upon the 28, to ensure that their names are woven into the very identity of a society that has learned to see, to listen, and to act. Their lives were cut short, but their impact is infinite as they continue to serve as a silent, powerful influence on the ways we prioritize the safety, the the dignity, and the future of every person, especially those who find themselves at the margins of our collective attention. In this closing reflection, we recognize the transformative power of truth, even when that truth is steeped in the most agonizing of details. The exposure of the Candyman's operations was not merely a victory for the investigators or a conclusion for the legal system. It was a reclaiming of the victims' humanity from the dark shroud of the shallow graves. By telling their stories, by documenting the failures that led to their demise, and by committing ourselves to the cause of preventing such a recurrence, we transform the narrative of tragedy into a narrative of protection and awareness. The Houston mass murders, for all their darkness, have left behind a trail of light, the light of knowledge, the light of institutional change, and the light of a society that has emerged from the experience with a deeper, more profound sense of its obligation to its most vulnerable members. This light must be protected, nurtured, and carried forward with an unwavering commitment to the truth, ensuring that the shadows of the past never again find the cover they need to commit such devastation. The story is now part of our legacy, a solemn record of a time when the world was forced to confront the absolute limits of human cruelty and the necessity of our collective, vigilant love. We leave this chronicle with a deepened sense of humility and a renewed, resolute determination to ensure that the sanctity of every life remains our most sacred, uncompromising priority. The memory of the 28 will continue to guide our efforts, a silent, enduring beacon that keeps us focused, compassionate, and forever committed to the defense of all we hold dear. May their names, their potential, and the memory of their lives continue to inspire a world that is not only aware of the darkness, but is deeply and fundamentally committed to the triumph of the light. This is the only way forward, the only true tribute we can offer, and the only path that honors the full, lived potential of those who were so cruelly stolen away. Their history is our history, their loss is our common lesson, and their memory is the enduring foundation upon which we build a future that is defined by our refusal to ever again remain blind to the suffering that may be unfolding right in our own neighborhoods. Through this, we find our strength, we confirm our humanity, and we ensure that the light of our awareness remains constant, protecting the present, illuminating the future, and forever serving as a vigilant, compassionate witness to the 28 who will always remain a vital part of the story we are united in telling and, above all, the story we are united in living as a society that values the life, the dignity, and the future of every individual above all else, ensuring that the shadow of the Candyman is finally and completely eclipsed by the enduring, collective light of our memory and our resolve to remain forever watchful, forever caring, and forever, unequivocally, protectors of one another. The final, concluding perspective on the Houston mass murders serves not as a bridge to closure, but as a sentinel standing guard over the memory of the 28 boys whose lives were dismantled in the Pasadena house. To reach the end of this chronicle is to accept that the true resolution of such a catastrophe is never found in the simple finality of a court ruling or the passing of decades, but in the sustained, active commitment to the values of awareness, vigilance, and compassion that this case has demanded of us. We are left with the undeniable reality that the Candyman's reign of terror was as much a consequence of institutional silence as it was the product of individual malice, and it is this uncomfortable truth that must remain at the forefront of our societal consciousness. The 28 victims were not merely subjects of a horrific crime. They were individuals whose futures were systematically stolen and whose absence leaves a permanent, aching void in the fabric of their families and the community. By refusing to let their memories dim, we perform a vital act of defiance against the very darkness that sought to erase them, asserting that the humanity of the individual is a value that transcends the brutality of the predator. This narrative has forced us to navigate the most harrowing terrain of the human experience, examining the mechanics of extreme exploitation and the tragic erosion of the moral compass that occurs when a society fails to adequately protect its most vulnerable members. The case remains a stark reminder that the security of our neighborhoods is not a static state of existence, but a fragile, ongoing achievement that requires the engagement and the awareness of every member of the community. The Candyman exploited the gaps in our vigilance, operating with a chilling, calculated confidence that relied on our collective desire to believe in the best of those around us. While this trust is the foundation of a functioning, healthy community, the Houston tragedy warns us that it must be coupled with an active, critical engagement with the world. We must strive to be a society that values the safety of our youth above the convenience of our assumptions, one that is willing to confront the discomfort of asking difficult questions and to acknowledge that the potential for darkness is a reality that cannot be ignored. The evolution of our protective institutions in the aftermath of the discovery of the mass graves at the Boat Shed and High Island represents a significant, though deeply painful, maturation of the justice system. The shift toward a more integrated and proactive model of missing persons investigation is the most tangible, lasting legacy of the victims, a procedural transformation that has undeniably saved lives in the years since. Every life that has been rescued, every potential tragedy that has been averted by the improved alertness of the community and the dedication of law enforcement is a quiet, profound tribute to the memory of those who were lost in the summer of 1973. We are the beneficiaries of their tragedy, the inheritors of a harder one, more vigilant reality that is better equipped to recognize the signs of danger and to respond with the necessary urgency. This is a responsibility that we carry forward, an obligation to continue the improvement of our protective systems and to ensure that the standards of justice and care are always rising to meet the challenges of an ever-changing world. As we carry the memory of the 28 into the future, we must also recognize the importance of the psychological resilience that has been demonstrated by the families of the victims. Their journey through the aftermath has been one of quiet, persistent strength, a testament to the capacity of the human heart to endure the most unimaginable of losses and to emerge with a profound, steadfast commitment to the truth. Their voices, their stories, and their presence in the public record have been the most essential elements in keeping the humanity of the victims at the center of our discourse. By ensuring that the victims are seen as individuals with families, with potential, and with lives that mattered deeply, the families have effectively prevented the Candyman from succeeding in his ultimate goal of erasure. They have transformed the memory of their loss into a catalyst for a more aware and more protective society, ensuring that the legacy of their loved ones is one of endurance, light, and the unwavering defense of the dignity of every individual. The enduring relevance of the Houston mass murders in our cultural and intellectual life underscores the importance of historical memory as a guardian of the truth. We document these events, we analyze their complexities, and we reflect on their consequences not because we delight in the horror, but because we recognize the vital necessity of learning from the darkest chapters of our past to prevent their recurrence. The story of Dean Corll, with all its devastating, gruesome details, must be maintained as a permanent reference point, a somber warning about the consequences of societal indifference and the importance of our individual and collective roles as keepers of one another's safety. It is a narrative that demands we remain students of the past, even when the curriculum is defined by the most uncomfortable of truths, for it is only through this persistent engagement that we can ensure that the light of our awareness remains clear and focused. We are the keepers of this history, the guardians of the memory, and the architects of a future that is founded upon the hard-won wisdom of those who came before us. In closing this chronicle, we recognize that the story of the Candyman is not a finish line, but a catalyst, a starting point for a society that is committed to the values of empathy, integrity, and the uncompromising defense of the sanctity of human life. The 28 boys remain with us, not in the physical world, but in the moral resolve of our communities and in the heightened alertness of the institutions that protect us. Their absence is a weight that we carry together, a shared burden that unites us in our common goal of ensuring that no such darkness can ever again find a sanctuary in the life we share. We walk forward with the knowledge that our vigilance is the best tribute to their memory, and that our compassion is the most profound assertion of our humanity. The legacy of the Houston mass murders will endure as long as we hold fast to the lessons we have learned, as long as we remain vigilant, as long as we continue to care, and as long as we refuse, above all else, to ever again look away from the suffering of those whose safety is the foundation of our own. The final word on this tragedy must be one of profound, somber respect for the lives that were denied their future and for the families who have walked the long path of endurance with grace and unwavering strength. Their story is now a vital, permanent part of our understanding of the world, a record that will continue to guide our efforts, inspire our vigilance, and reinforce our commitment to the sanctity of every individual. As we close this long and harrowing account, we do so with the solemn promise that we will remain watchful, we will remain compassionate, and we will remain, always, the protectors of one another, ensuring that the light of our awareness continues to illuminate the way, keeping the shadows at bay and honoring, in every action and every decision, the precious, fragile, and enduring memory of the 28 who will forever be a part of the conscience of the society they have so profoundly and irrevocably changed. Their impact is a living, breathing force that continues to define our resolve, a beacon that ensures the tragedy of the past is the safeguard of the future, a future where we remain, together, eternally vigilant, forever caring, and always dedicated to the triumph of the truth over the darkness that once so cruelly took the heart of a community, a resolve that now stands as the final, enduring, and triumphant legacy of the 28 boys of Houston, Texas, whose lives, though cut short, have fundamentally and permanently shaped our commitment to the safety and the dignity of all who share this path through time.